Hello and welcome to the 2026 Euronaval Talks. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this series of conferences online was launched by Euronaval in 2023. And we are now back by popular demand during the 2026 edition. If you would like to see what we did in 2023 and 2024, you can go on the Euronaval YouTube channel. This series of talks was launched with the idea of keeping the conversation going between the trade shows every 2 years. And when we started in 2023, 2024, the war in Ukraine had already been going on for a year. And it was starting to give us a sense of what war in the 21st century would look like. But many of the roundtables we were holding at the time were still very much in the hypothesis of what could war look like at our doorsteps. Unfortunately, as this new series of Euronaval Talks starts, we are there now. We are seeing what war looks like at sea. We're seeing what it looks like at our doorstep. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed for now almost a month, and we are starting to feel the effects very strongly. So current events are effectively reminding us that war is not only a conflict, an all-out conflict, but is also very much a hybrid situation. And what better way to explore this theme to begin with talking about ports. Now, we think about ports and port protection. The questions are, what does a hybrid threat look like for a port? And who is responsible for protecting that port? And what technologies can we use to protect those ports? So today, to answer some of those questions and probably raise many more, I have with me 3 fantastic panelists with different backgrounds who will be able to give us their opinions and in-depth analysis on some of these questions. So without further ado, I would like to start by introducing Styliano Tsimis, Deputy Director of the Vulnerabilities and Resilience Community of Interest at the Hybrid COE, joining us all the way from Helsinki, Finland. Hi, Styliano.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining. And then here with me in the studio in Paris, I also have Stavros Karamperidis, who is Associate Professor in Maritime Economics and Head of Maritime Transport Research Group at the University of Plymouth. Welcome, Stavros.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. And last but certainly not least, and back by my demand, Joseba Tena, Chief Commercial Officer at Forces.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Still as warm in the studio, I know. So without further ado, I would like to start with you, Styliano, and I would like to, we talk about hybrid threat and threats, and this is a word that is being bandied about by many people, attributing to it many different definitions. So I was wondering if you could briefly tell us, what do we mean when we're talking about hybrid threats?
Thank you, Alex. And first and foremost, I would like to thank the 2026 Euronaval talk for this unique opportunity. So, to make a start of considering how hybrid threats against ports can look like. So when I think about hybrid attacks against ports, 2 simple but critical questions come to mind. The first, what if just a few major ports suddenly shut down at the same time? Imagine Rotterdam, Hamburg, Antwerp, all completely stalled. Not for an hour, not for a day, but for a week or longer. And the second, does it take a full-scale attack to make that happen? And according to my understanding, the answer to that question is no. A blend of hard-to-trace and low-visibility hybrid threats is more than enough to collapse the entire European seaport ecosystem. And when I talk about hard-to-trace and low-visibility hybrid threats, I mean cyber attacks on terminal operating system, custom databases, or automated cranes, GPS spoofing, causing vessels to lose navigation accuracy, drone incursions, that force temporary shutdowns of terminals or the surrounding port airspace, sabotage of undersea data and electricity cables that keep ports operation running, disinformation campaigns, provoking labor unrest over safety risk or environmental hazards, manipulated shipping data leading to misrouted containers or ghost cargo that never existed, interference with critical service providers such as tag services, fuel bunkering, or pilotage. Each threat, according to my point of view, alone may seem minor, but coordinated, they can paralyze ports, create widespread uncertainty, trigger emergency protocols, and ultimately crash supply chains. So this is a set of hybrid threats that I call hard to trace, low visibility, that can happen against ports and especially against major European seaports.
Thank you, Stylianos. And so if I'm understanding this correctly, effectively what you're saying is that there's a whole collection of just under the threshold sort of activities that can happen that even just for an hour or a few hours could really threaten our economies. And I would like to ask you briefly before I pass the baton to my colleagues here at the studio. I know that at the Hybrid COE in Finland, you do a lot of tabletop exercises with very different stakeholders. Do you feel, without naming anyone, but do you feel that there is an understanding, or there is starting to be an understanding of how important this is?
Actually, what we are seeing is that first of all, let me clarify that and explain that the Hybrid Center of Excellence has 35 participating states, including European Union and the NATO. Mm-hmm. The center has the center runs its business for almost 7 years. It started in 2017. So it has almost 10 years in actively studying hybrid threats. Mm-hmm. The center has delivered, as you mentioned, many exercises, and the feedback that we have received is that states increasingly are interested in knowing much about hybrid threats and especially how they can counteract this type of threats, because it is a general thought. Mm-hmm. That from now on, hybrid threats are not the exception. Hybrid threats are the new normal. Mm-hmm. So we believe, according to what we receive from participating states, that hybrid threats are at their top priority, and they constitute their major concern about their national security. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Stylianos. I'd like to turn to you now, Stavros, because Stylianos started touching upon this, what this means for us if one of the ports goes down. And I know that when we were preparing for this roundtable, you had a couple of examples and also a lot of numbers, very interesting numbers, about what this could mean for us.
Yeah, thank you very much, as I said earlier on, for having me. And of course, all that kind of discussion a couple of years ago, it was a hypothetical scenario. Now, unfortunately, with the war in Iran, we see it on a daily basis. That Iran, for example, is bombing one of the refineries in Qatar or whatever else. And then, the Qataris, for example, says, that part is costing 20 billion and things like that. So we can easily quantify stuff. And it's not difficult for us to find those numbers nowadays because they're out in the news. What we have to understand, first of all, First layer, as Stylianos was mentioned, is that when we're talking about a port, it's a very complex ecosystem. And the reason for that is that because we have so many stakeholders interacting there, actually is the link between the maritime with the land operation. And we have to consider that 90% of the global trade is passing through the ports. Okay, and in order to achieve that efficiently and effectively, and that's why not a lot of people are paying attention to it, there is only a lot of attention in the media only when something goes wrong, is because we're doing it so effectively and efficiently. And as Stylianos mentioned, you have the pilots, for example, the stevedores, you have so many stakeholders there. But then the second layer we have to consider, and that's more strategic that we're discussing, and we're also examining in my university with several colleagues that I'm having over there, is that how we can try to identify the knock-on effects in the supply chain. And prime examples, again, they come from the region of the Gulf. Because now, for example, the first couple of days, everybody were paying attention to what is happening to the oil supplies, because 21 million barrels were coming from the Gulf, equivalent amount of energy was coming for LNG. But now as you go down to the supply chain, people start realizing that a lot of the refining facilities were happening in the Gulf, so that now we start talking about urea and ammonia and other critical components that are coming out from energy sources like LNG and oil, and we understand the knock-on effects. So for instance, what will happen to Africa if because most of the fertilizers was coming from the Gulf. So now that the Gulf region is closed, and it's not only the tankers that we're talking about, but also dry bulk carriers that are bringing the goods in. And of course, to bring them in, you need ports to operate, right? And of course the passages, so the vessels can get in and out. If we cannot bring those vital products, how we can keep the economy going forward? And just destroying, for example, one berth is not only that it's going to cost X amount of billions or millions, is the time that we also need to fix it back again. Because when we're talking about port infrastructure, we're talking about something that will be like 5 to 7 years to be rebuilt. So that's why it's becoming very critical to have a good understanding about the importance of the maritime sector, and specifically the ports, in the overall ecosystem and how to protect it. Because protection of those critical infrastructures is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, this is, as you said, it's not just the ports themselves, it's like everything that works in a port, around a port, to the port.
Yeah, because you have, for example, trucks getting and loading and unloading goods, rail wagons are getting in, and of course, as Stylianos mentioned, you can have a cyber attack, for example, that it can bring down one of the terminals, and you may think, oh, what's the problem with that? Yeah, the problem can have a lot of knock-on effects, because if, for example, most of the goods were coming with the rail, and one of the rail terminals is down, and you cannot move the goods in and out because of the volume of cargo being moved with rail, if you try to move it with trucks, for example, then probably you can create a lot of congestion to the local port network, to the road network. And that, of course, will have knock-on effect not only to the port operations, but to the people living nearby the ports, because don't forget that ports have increased organically. Ports were always used to be at the center of a city, and most of the ports, even today, they're in a very good proximity of a city center. So as you can imagine, if the roads nearby the port are locked or blocked, then of course the city center will suffer, and of course the overall economy, because as you can imagine, if it takes like 2 hours from people to go to their work and come back, that has an impact to the local economy as well, has an impact to the local pollution, and so forth and so on. So the knock-on effects can be numerous, and we need like 3 hours to start explaining them one by one, and I'm sure we don't have that kind of time.
We do not, no.
Yes.
But it does paint a very scary picture, if I may, about what could happen. And in fact, it's interesting that you're mentioning this, because someone I know was organizing a roundtable, a conference, a whole-day conference on the importance of the maritime domain for Austria. And my first reaction when he told me this was like, Austria, really? Like, yeah. Maritime domain, Austria? I'm confused. Last I checked a map, it was landlocked.
Yes.
But then he explained to me, he said, listen, like, Austria is actually one of the key nodes for distributing all of those container ships that come from like these ships from the ports. So anything that happens at sea and then in a port has an impact on Austria and its economy.
Yeah. And you don't have to be living in an island as I live in the UK, for example, to understand that 96% of all the cargo getting in and out comes on a vessel. As you rightly said, even in landlocked countries like Austria, as I said, because there is because we do it so cheaply in the maritime sector, most of the goods have been moved with the maritime. Yeah. So you need good networks that are linked with the ports, and then they extend that to the maritime leg of the overall transportation, of the overall supply chain ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. Joseba, we've been talking a lot about what happens overground,
Yeah.
but I know that Forces deals with everything that happens underwater. So what's your point of view on all this?
So yeah, at Forces, we've been primarily focused on developing instrumentation for the underwater domain. One of our sonars, the Sentinel intruder detection sonar, is actually used to protect from underwater threats, small underwater threats. We're talking combat divers, we're talking swimmer delivery vehicles, underwater drones or uncrewed underwater vehicles or unmanned underwater systems. Yes, we got all the names. And we've been doing it now for many years, and those sonars have been deployed worldwide, and they help us understand, interestingly, where the risk is perceived, and I think it also shows, it points to the fact that there are solutions out there to help protect from these threats. But what we find is whereas some places where they perceive the threat, they can work on that threat and work with companies like ours to provide solutions. When it comes to ports and harbors, they're really complex, and they're complex for us to understand. Each country seems to have their own regulations and rules, and each port has its own history. And we struggle to understand who's responsible for the security of a port, particularly in the underwater domain. Who's responsible for the infrastructure within that port? Is it the owners of the infrastructure? Is it the authority responsible for running the port? Is it the government? And we find that, and it feels almost like the ports themselves struggle to understand who's responsible for responding to that threat. So, like Stavros said, it's like the risk is there, it's tangible. It's we know we're starting to feel that risk now in ways that we perhaps didn't do 10 years ago. And when you talk to critical national infrastructure, nuclear facilities close to the seawater or desalination plants, it's a very simple conversation with the person that's running that facility. When it comes to a port and harbor, commercial port and harbor, it's still very difficult to understand who we need to be talking to and who owns that threat. I think that's something that governments need to take very seriously. They need to start understanding, look at the work that Stavros is doing, I guess, and work out where's the biggest economic impact, and make sure that we do something about that.
So when you're saying that this is what you see, it's because it depends on who you're having the conversations with. You're struggling to understand who you should have the conversations with?
Yeah, I guess, yes. Like we've been selling the systems for a long time. We have sold into port and harbors, but selling into a port and harbor is always a much more complex exercise than it is selling to a navy. And selling to navies is not easy. There's lots of stakeholders. You got capability managers, you got requirement managers, you got the actual procurement arm, the people that are going to run the system. But it's still a lot more structured than when you're talking to a commercial port. And every commercial port is different. That's our experience. You think you understand commercial ports, and then you go to a new country and there's another commercial port, and it's a completely different beast. Yeah, and I don't think that I do think that people understand the risk now. We see it. It's not just the risk of a mine. We've seen underwater vehicles being used in some scenarios currently, and their impact is significant. And the ability for us to work out that they're there is difficult unless we're actually monitoring the underwater domain.
Absolutely. We'll come back to monitoring the underwater domain in a bit, but I wanted to come back to Stylianos because, again, doing the tabletop exercises and talking to 32, if I'm not mistaken, or 36 nations, you must be seeing what Joseba was saying, very different points of views of who's responsible, who isn't, how does it work. So what are you seeing from your perspective at the hybrid COE in terms of understanding this responsibility for protecting ports?
For the center, what Joseba has already said is extremely crucial, and I'm referring to the legal framework that cover all hybrid incidents in the maritime domain. And what our experience says is that whenever a hybrid threat is unfolding in the maritime domain, is doing that in legal gray zones, maritime zones. That means that almost 100% of the incidents that happen at sea, they are happening outside territorial waters, just outside territorial waters. And why this is happening and why hybrid threat actors choose something like that? Because the state sovereignty is not full in those maritime zones. So hybrid threat actors chose these maritime regions because they can sail freely without any specific control by the coastal state. And that means that, for example, we have seen shadow fleet vessels to loiter just outside the coastal European states in order to map critical undersea infrastructure or to sabotage undersea cables and pipelines. And we have witnessed that the states remained without doing something in order to prevent and stop these vessels. Of course, an exception is what Finland did at Christmas 2024, when for the first time a European state, stopped a shadow fleet vessel, the Enkl S, even this ship sailed outside Finnish territorial waters. And why Finland did something like that? Because Finland wanted to stop further damage. To remind you that until the time that Finland intervened and stopped the Enkl S, this ship had already damaged 4 undersea telecom cables and 1 electricity cable. And if this ship didn't stop by the Finnish authorities, could damage and another electricity cable, the second one. To conclude is that the legal framework that all these hybrid incidents happens is a problematic point for the center, and this is the reason that constantly we delve into this matter, and we are studying all these incidents, and we are trying to find solutions that provide these solutions to participating states and to stakeholders that their job is to protect critical undersea infrastructure.
So it's interesting because what you're saying, I mean, when we're thinking about ports, we're thinking about something that is on land. And what you're effectively saying is that there's this gray zone beyond the 200 nautical miles that allows these attackers, these perpetrators to operate in a gray area and these hybrid threats. And in fact, I remember when I last saw you at the Kiel Munition Clearance Week, there was a whole morning dedicated to this legal framework not existing as to what do you do in that case when there's this ship that far away that is attacking your port, but they're outside of your territorial waters.
The matter with European ports is almost the same. I can't see any difference when if we have a perpetrator that target critical undersea infrastructure, and if this perpetrator want to disrupt a port, I think that the context is the same. Actually, a port has, unfortunately, from a security perspective, a port has two entrances. The first one is from the seaside, and the other is from the land side. And this is something that European and port authorities have to keep in their mind when they are considering security matters. So I think that it's a matter of it's a crucial matter for port authorities to take into consideration all these vulnerabilities when they are planning their security resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. Stavros,
Yes.
in all the research that you're doing, as you were saying at your center, when we're talking about issues of responsibilities and attribution as well, who do you speak to? How do you do your research, and how are you perceiving this issue of responsibility?
We try to speak with all the stakeholders because, as I said, it's not only, as Stylianos said, it's not like you have one port and it has two entrances. It's like you see it from the port perspective that there's two entrances. But of course, if you try to break it down to the port operator, then the port operator also has two entrances. And then the subcontractor of the port operator has also two entrances. So you start adding up all those entrances together. And we're talking about hundreds of entrances in and out the system. And that's what makes it vulnerable, let's call it that way. And especially in a more digital world. Why? Because as we're going towards the optimizing the overall operations, it's logical to enhance more and more digital technologies. And unfortunately, the maritime sector is one of the later comers in terms of digital adaptation. You know, it's not like the banks or other sectors that they have started infusing digital technologies for many, many years. I have to say that thankfully to COVID, we've seen a lot of jumps into the digital technology adaptation in the maritime sector. Because we like it or not, maritime sector is very traditional, which is a good thing from one perspective, but that's a totally different subject.
A whole other roundtable.
Yes, correct. But as we are going towards that kind of push of implemented digital solutions, we have to think what kind of gaps and what kind of vulnerabilities we leave with that kind of digital adaptations. And of course, that can be from physical, and that's why we need more sensors and more systems to close that gaps, but also digital, because as we're trying to integrate systems that are, some of the cases, very old, and the biggest problem we're having in the maritime sector, and that's why we're very late in the overall digital adaptation, is not that you're just changing your laptop and that's it, because that laptop is linked with an engine, which an engine costs a couple of millions, and you cannot really change the laptop and leave the engine the same, so the engine comes with the laptop, or with the software system, let's put it that way. And that's why you have to wait for 15, 20 years or 30 years in some cases until the overall asset makes its money, return on investment, and then replace it. But in order that kind of replacement to happen, in some cases you have to wait for 30 or 40 years. And that's why we have that kind of big gaps yet into the overall system. Because as you can imagine, when the engineers were designing the system 30 years ago, nobody was having in mind that we're going to have a digital integration nowadays and would have attackers trying to attack and penetrate the systems and all that kind of stuff. So that's why we need to find out ways of training, of course, its personnel, because as we identify the maritime sector, 80% of the cyber attacks, for example, are coming because of the humans. Okay, so by training the people, we can provide short-term solutions, and of course, long-term solutions, we can upgrade the overall infrastructure.
Of course. Okay, so we're talking about issues of, dealing with responsibility, and we're talking about the fact that there are two entrances, basically from every single person who works into these ports. Now, my question, you've mentioned integration, and this is something I wanted to come to with you, Joseba, because you have systems that are part of a wider ecosystem of security as well. So what I'm wondering, and the two questions I have for you is, how the systems that you are selling are integrating with this wider ecosystem, if they are. But also, how are you seeing, because you, as you mentioned, you're having conversations with both private, civil and military customers. So how do you see this integration and discussion between these different customers?
Yeah, so I guess it's a harbor is multi-domain, but traditionally a harbor has been understood as a maritime domain. So they've not looked at the undersea domain carefully. They've not looked at the cyber domain carefully. They've probably not looked at space. But when it comes to a harbor, literally it's a multi-domain environment. You're using GNSS to guide vessels. You're working in a domain that's where underwater actors could act, where you have underwater infrastructure, you're digitized. So when we work with other facilities, be them critical national infrastructure, be navies, ships, and we provide solutions, we're typically engaging with institutions and systems that understand the threat to be multi-domain and are talking to us because they understand that threat to be multi-domain. And then we've had to adapt to that multi-domain and provide interfaces so that our systems can be integrated with their command and control systems. So as we go to all of these facilities, it's on us, it's incumbent on us to make sure that we can interface with them.
Okay.
So from that perspective, we have a solution that's ready to be integrated with existing security solutions. But what we find is, depending on again, it's down to how the risk environment is perceived and how complex it is to talk to the customers, whether they're ready for us, right? And I think one of the things is like harbors are used to working in the underwater domain when it comes to sort of more operational issues. So if they have to dredge the harbor, they will do a bathymetric survey ahead of dredging, and then another one after they've dredged to make sure that everything's worked out okay. So they're familiar with the sonars, they're familiar with the instruments that they will work to do regular inspections. And some harbors, I'm sure, are doing regular inspections and checking for anything that's odd. What they've done, what I believe they tend to do less of is that continuous surveillance. So how do you surveil the underwater domain continuously to ensure that you're detecting people in real time, not in 6-month intervals, right? So that's the bit that I think the harbor masters or the governments working alongside them, or the owners of the infrastructure, whoever it is that's liable and needs to be doing this. I think that's the bit that they need to start to think about. It's like, okay, how am I working across? And obviously, I'm focused on the underwater domain, but like I said, they need to be working across domains and thinking about how am I going to look at that multi-domain environment? How am I sure that I'm protected against that? Where's my highest threat? Which threats will have the highest impact? I don't have all the answers, but we know that in the underwater domain we have a very good answer that we've been deploying for a while. So.
But it also sounds like, in a way, you're almost like the conductor and the orchestra at the same time. Yeah. You're trying to orchestrate all of this and also explain to your customers that this all needs to be integrated, and you need to be able to share information.
Yeah.
Now, the quick last question I had for you was, as I was saying before, you said you also you also speak with navies. How do they perceive their role in protecting ports? Do they perceive it at all?
So interestingly, when we're having conversations with navies, we're not talking about commercial boards. So I'm not sure how to answer that. Our focus with navies is more around navy infrastructure.
Their own ports.
Yeah, their own facilities and how we work with them to ensure that they're keeping them safe. And it's not just the port and harbors. It's if you have a ship and you're sailing and going to a foreign port, how do you ensure that your ship is secure while you're playing away from home? Those type of questions, right? So that tends to be the focus of our conversations. Colloquially, like at a sort of like non-official level, we might have conversations about that, and typically there's a lot of head scratching, right? But that's not fair. That's not a real answer. That's just
What you've seen,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you feel that with everything that we've seen happening in Ukraine over the last 4 years, and then what's happening now around the Strait of Hormuz, is there more of a sense of urgency from navies to protect their own infrastructure and a sort of ramping up of spending to be able to do so?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you just have to look at the budget just across all the Western countries, starting with the US, the investment going into unmanned systems it just keeps growing, but the growth is no longer linear, and that's across all domains. And certainly, when we looked at some of the impact that the Ukraine's had on the maritime domain using underwater systems that we've seen, there's a clear answer there as to why you would want to be investing on those platforms. And if we're investing on those platforms, so are our peer adversaries, and if they're investing in those platforms, then we need to make sure that we invest in the systems that counter them as well. So it's from an engineering perspective, innovation perspective, it's a really rewarding place to be working at, because you're working on new solutions that are going to make a difference. And you can feel proud about how those systems are going to be used. And the pace of innovation is significant as well. So we keep seeing new uncrewed systems across the underwater domain. And that keeps us, scratching our heads as to how we're going to do something to stop those systems from having an impact with us. From the government's perspective, it's probably not as exciting. It's going to be a lot more demanding, and I think we got a lot of work in terms of a society to decide, how we're going to play this, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we're very quickly coming to the end of our roundtable today. So the last question I wanted to ask you all, and I'll start with you, Stylianos, is, in a nutshell, if I only give you a minute, what do you think should change for ports protection to continue improving on the basis of what you've seen and what you're discussing at the hybrid COE?
A practical priority for port authorities. Actually, both Stavros and Joseba have already said about it, and but I would like to stress it more that priority for port authorities have to be to build resilience. And what I am meaning with that is to develop a full set of hybrid threat scenarios that every port must be ready to face. This is extremely crucial for me and for the center. And for each scenario, port authorities have to define the legal frameworks, the chain of command, and the rapid response plans, case by case, port by port.
Absolutely.
That means that these scenarios must be well prepared in advance, so that when something happens, operational responses are timely, coordinated, and effective. So this is my one recommendation.
Yes, not a small one, definitely. Stavros, from your point of view, from what you've seen and the research you're doing, if you had to say to these authorities, please get your stuff together, what would it be?
Apart from doing the tabletop exercise and the workshops, I think it's very important to have a clear communication channel with the stakeholders, because what we identify from the work we're doing, and because we're working very closely with the maritime sector, is that it's not only the first tier of people that have been affected. Usually you can have a second or a third tier. And what I mean by that, you can have, for example, the Port Authority, but maybe some of those threats we're discussing is not hitting that Port Authority. They may hit not even the berth operator, they may hit the stevedore, for example. And that is giving them the back door to get in the system. And as I said, because we're having thousands of those doors existing into a port ecosystem, we have to make sure that we do a proper analysis of those back doors and how we risk them, and how we can make scenarios on how we mitigate the system and how we can be ready for that kind of scenarios. I think that kind of exercise is the most crucial one, and especially as we're enhancing more and more digitalization to our daily operations.
Thank you, Stavros. And what about from your point of view, Joseba?
It's hard for me to sort of try to paint a picture of what needs to be done in 1 minute. I believe the ports and harbors affects us all. So it's not just the port authority. They have the biggest headache maybe, but I think it's incumbent on all of us that we look after them. And it's incumbent of all of us that we put the right legal framework to ensure that they're mandated to look after themselves. We have the bodies in the COE, we have the experts to steer us in the right direction as to what needs to be done. But I think the governments need to take this seriously. They need to come together and try and make sense out of this, because we're asking lots of different ports and harbors very difficult, serious questions, and we should be coming together, I think, and coming up with joint answers.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much to the three of you for being here with me today. I think one thing that is very clear that is really coming across from this discussion that we had today is that when we think about Euronaval, when we think about navies, we think about defense, and we think about the ports of, as we've seen in the Black Sea, naval ports. But actually, when we're talking about hybrid threats, and this is what is happening now, we're talking about ports at large, we're talking about multiple entities being responsible, we're talking about, as Joseba has been showing us as well, technologies that cover the whole spectrum, not just defense, but also security of these ports. And this is perfect, actually, because it's also a great introduction to the roundtable that will be published next, that will be launched next, which will look at critical infrastructure at sea. And we'll be touching upon a lot of the conversations that we've been having today as well. We'll be digging more into cybersecurity, something that Stavros has put a lot of emphasis on. The fact that there are entry points different ways everywhere from different entities. So please stay tuned. And as I said, if you want to see what we discussed in 2023 and 24 to see how things have evolved, those are online on the Euronaval YouTube channel. And if you enjoyed this talk, please don't hesitate to like, comment, share. We always welcome also a good dose of feedback. And again, Joseba, Stavros, Stylianos, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here with me. Yeah. And I look forward to this conversation continuing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.